talk about that I think successfully capture, and one of them we're going to go way back in time, but I'm always fascinated, like you said, with things that are different, like with more meaningful aspects of the military, and so I studied transitions, difficult transitions, and so the two things that pointed me to how well it can be done is there's a 1945 film called The Best Years of Our Lives, and it follows 4 World War II veterans who came from the same town, didn't know each other beforehand, but had spent the entire war together, and then they go home and they have to deal with figuring out what their role in society is. Class becomes an issue for the first time where it wasn't beforehand, because some of these men were officers and came from money, and some of these men were lower enlisted. One of them had lost his hands, and so it shows, it was Oscar award-winning, incredible, but it's not the bang bang shoot 'em up World War II movie. It's following 4 men and their struggle with their transition home, and I thought that's probably one of the best military films I've ever seen. The other thing is probably going to be a little bit of a tell, but there is a show on Netflix called Disjointed. Anyone heard of this show? And it's Kathy Bates running a pot shop in California. But her security officer is an OIF veteran, and he is initially straight edge, and then he starts having some problems because the VA dropped him. And over the course of 2 seasons, they do this really brilliant job, like animating what's going on in his head, what persistent thoughts look like, what demons and nightmares look like from the mind of a soldier with PTSD, and then they show him slowly introduce medical grade marijuana into it and how that eases some of the tension. And so oddly, it's a World War II flick from 1945 and Kathy Bates.
Yeah. So maybe it's almost like a selection thing. You find it in the places you're least expecting.
Right.
I guess I had 2. Has anybody seen Generation Kill, the HBO miniseries, or also a book? I feel like that show covers the absolute ridiculousness of any group of military-aged people, males in the show. Better than anything else. Best character getting Corporal Parsons, who's just ripped out of his mind on caffeine and saying, yeah, write about it and get it out, which is what SWAT has done. Or you die. You let it consume you and kill yourself, which is what happened to his friend. And it kind of showed the 2 ways you're going to ground it, because there's really no middle ground. Your middle ground is absolute misery, which will lead to the other road. And I believe it starts to show Swofford taking the right way. He's still alive, at least.
Yeah, I struggled with this one, in part because I don't have a life and I don't watch much popular culture.
Good choice, honestly.
If it's not on, if it's not a kid's show, it's not for the senior. But what I can say is that the sort of everyday texture of the jokes, the name calling, the nicknames, the embrace the stuff, like this idea. I think film often gets that, right? Like this sort of little absurdities of the everyday life in uniform, which can be in garrison or deployed. Like, I think I remember when I was lieutenant, I worked in like a big open space where we were not deployed, kind of like cubicles, and one of my coworkers who outranked me had a poster of a scantily clad woman in his cubicle space. And I remember going to him and asking him to take it down because I didn't like it, and he's like, whatever. And to boss, I didn't like it, and he said, whatever. And so those kinds of daily interactions that are that are very much about power too, that, and about the structural stuff that's embedded in terms of gender especially. I think film also captures that sometimes really nicely.
Okay. Sorry, Eric.
No, that's fine. I'm just down on the flank. I wanted to point, this discussion, this larger public discussion about, the civil divide and how do we better cope with it. I mean, it's been going on for a while, right? I mean, it's not like we're just stumbling upon this. I mean, I got out in 2010, and when I was in, people, you get the kids and everybody's like, "What's like over there?" And there wasn't, to hell and back again. There wasn't Restrepo. There wasn't, these actual, high quality documentary, explorations of the intertremendous experience. So, I mean, you got like people who are watching Hurt Locker and, stuff like that, which is just, I mean, there was nothing to point to. Versus I think now, because there's been such an emphasis placed on how do we do a better job of telling these stories, it's made that experience a little more, I know we're going to talk about this, the reintegration a little more, I don't want to say easy, but you have more tools at your disposal to help to reach out to people and say, listen, like, this isn't, I'm not in this film, but it's close enough to my lived experience that we're gonna be able to speak the same language a little more. And versus if all you've seen is Saving Private Ryan, I mean, it's just there's a whole lot of translation that's gonna have to happen. And I think that's why events like this and films like that are really important for a lot of different reasons. But I just wanted to slip that in.
Yeah, and once again, Eric has marked a good transition point. To where it's the same question that I'm posing to the panelists, but in verse. Like, what aspects of war and military life do popular representations and narratives of war fail to adequately capture and bottle? And I feel there's going to be an interesting tension here to kind of preface these responses between, like, there's a spectrum of military experience, especially to the extent that things like everyday absurdity and other things go. Because somebody like Eric's experience of everyday absurdity, when you walk 15 miles every day with a rifle in your hand, is going to be a little different than Michelle's absurdity as an Air Force officer in Somalia, which might be a little more like organizational absurdity at times. So I'm interested to see some thoughts here, but I guess we can start with Michelle's officer's perspective.
Sure. Officer and Air Force perspective, because I think this really does bring out, well, so let me start by saying, I think what I wrote in my response to you was that I don't think popular representation ever can really represent how complex and detailed and therefore prone to mistakes massive deployments are, right? Like, unless you've been through it and you had a chance to see how all of the logistics get done and all of the things you have to think about, even if you've practiced hundreds of times, right? It's still a really complex thing to do. And so I don't think, films typically are like, they're there, and then they're there, and then they're fighting, right? I mean, they're not interested in logistics because they're not boring, but actually, none of it gets done. If that stuff breaks, then none of the other stuff gets done. So that's one thing. The reason that I explained that a little bit is because I was in the Air Force and I was an officer, and I deployed with a unit that was a numbered Air Force, so kind of an intermediate level. Headquarters with a mobility mission to deploy to theaters and set up a forward operating location for transport aircraft. So at that time it was called Air Mobility Command. I don't know what it's called now. So half of the world's aircraft mobility communication. In Somalia, we deployed to Mogadishu, which was the capital city and also the major airfield in the country. And we set up our headquarters at the at the old embassy compound, U.S. embassy compound there. And in the embassy compound, once everything got kind of up and running, it turned into this tent city of, we eventually had a chow hall, and we had obviously big tents that seemed 20, whatever number of people. And so the thing that I wrote about in my response to Davis was that within the embassy compound, you could see this clear difference between the Air Force's style of deployment and the Marine style of deployment. Air Force style was we had very lovely tents and we had air conditioners, and Marine style were much more basic, right, and no air conditioners. Those sorts of things are kind of they're funny to think about in one way, but they're also I think important in terms of understanding the ways that people who serve in the military are quite different, right? And the services are all quite different. They all create different ethos. Ethos is that a word? And all of that, I think, is lost to most people who haven't served in the military. And I think it's actually profoundly important in how people think about their military service and their post-service identities. So it's not so much about officer perspective, I guess, although I will say, too, that when I deployed to Somalia, I had minimal training on how to use an automatic weapon, for example. I've done maybe a couple of trainings at home before we deployed just to get my qualification. But when I got there, we were actually expected to serve as kind of escorts on vehicles that went back and forth between the embassy compound and the airfield. And I didn't know how to do it. So I had to learn there. We had a combat control guy who basically set up a training somewhere outside of Mogadishu. And we all went out there and we practiced. And that's how I learned in that moment to use M16. But so that's also not necessarily an officer thing, but it is a thing about which service you're in and what you're qualified to do and what the expectations are when you get to the field.
For me, what it failed to adequately captures like the body of the military, or in my case, the Army as a whole. Like at 17, being pumped full of effectively how they propaganda about the military. I assumed that everybody in the military is like a stand-up good person, like as a base thing. But then in 2005, it's like you have 10 fingers and you can kind of see who meet you at the office. We'll pay for your college guy. And that's like I enlisted in the Detroit MEPS area. And I was literally in a waiting room, kind of like what you're sitting in. And they had us pull numbers, and they said, who here has a felony? And if somebody raised their hand, they told them to leave. And who here will pop the drug test? If you raise your hand, they asked you what drug. Mine was weed. And they said, you're good, sit back down. And then that's when I started well, maybe you'll go into the military and they'll turn you into this upright citizen of America. And then I remember seeing a guy come back who went to high school with me, who was doing bumps of coke off the urinal before he went to basic, or boot camp, whatever it is they call it. And then in basic training, you have people who are wetting the bed, who don't know how to do laundry, who've never made a bed. And then you're like, okay, these are still a whole bunch of dumb kids and they're nervous. I'll get to my first unit and everything will be much different. And then I quickly realized that's not the case. I had to order people to shower, and in one case we physically hosed another human being down because he was not showering. And this is stateside. He has showers whenever he wants. And we were going to Afghanistan. It got even worse. People who would not wash their clothes, their uniform could just stand up on its own in the corner. You quickly realize that it's just kind of like Thunderdome, but everybody's dressed real nice.
Yeah, I had very similar. I think we all more or less did. But interesting though, I had this distinctive memory of. I mean, I was a young teenager on 9/11, but I distinctly remember thinking on 9/11. Thank God, there's this just core of, like the perfect individuals to, go take the war to the enemy, and I'm not, going to participate in that. And then I also have a distinctive memory of being stacked on a door in Ramadi in the middle of the night about to do a raid, and looking around at these guys and being like, oh my God, we're like those people, and they're nothing like I thought. It's just us. Like, where are the perfect people? Not at all. I mean, most people down, and nobody showers. I mean, but I mean, it's America, right? So, I mean, the military is full of real people. I mean, big surprise, right? And there's nothing that happens in basic that turns you into the, ideal form of humanity. I mean, I like what the recruiting brochure, so it's false advertising.
Yeah, I think one of the things pop culture has a problem with capturing is they don't know how to deal with the competency of the military. In both directions, I think pop culture presents the military, whatever branch of service, as if we know how to get out of an unending war, that we know what we're doing over there. I think that's, so my unit, we were an air assault Black Hawk battalion, and our sole
We've got to
mission,
translate.
helicopters, flying, good guys, beat the bad guys. Right, rode out of helicopters.
Now I get it. It's like Saving Private Ryan.
But what you ended up doing, the exciting missions took place under the cover of darkness, but during the day, we called ourselves the self-licking ice cream cone. Our sole purpose in life was to fly door gunners over convoys so that the convoys could deliver supplies so that we could fly over the convoys so that they could bring us this. And it was just, there was no purpose for that other than to just kind of sustain our own existence. And that was like 90% of the missions, was making sure that we had access to Diet Coke. And so it's, I feel like people assume when they hear that you're a veteran, because of the way it's portrayed in the media and in pop culture, that we were all well briefed on our mission and that mission had a conclusion. And honestly, it's turned into such a generational war that we're really just passing the baton. Well, maybe you know where this goes, because we don't. So.
If I could kind of take things in a slightly different direction, but still related to this question. And I know I've talked to you about this a little, Davis, and I mentioned it a little earlier, but I think, again, the thing that the movies failed to achieve, I was often, frankly, surprised. I mean, as an infantryman, as an 18-year-old unblooded infantryman, wondering what combat was going to be like, I was actually surprised at how much the movies got right about the sounds and the sights and, the stupid little sayings that people say about how, will you go tell my mother, blah, 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 blah. And, it all seemed kind of quaint to me when I was watching as a kid, and I always kind of assumed that they were getting a lot wrong, because it's just Hollywood, right? Maybe they talk to vets and whatnot, but I just kind of assumed this is nothing like that in reality. And what I found is that actually much of that wasn't all that far off base. But what I also found is that, these days, and I know I've told you this before, I mean, if you want to know what combat looks like and sounds like, you could just go on YouTube and watch some, ISIS dude with a GoPro raid some building, and he might even die in the video because, they still upload. that stuff, and you're going to see what it sounds like, and you're going to see what it looks like. But what that can't achieve, and what training can achieve, and what war movies can achieve, is that one, you know that there's no objective threat to yourself, or more importantly, the people that you care about that are with you. And no matter how long a miniseries is, the more important end of that spectrum, I talked about Band of Brothers later, the characters you're only invested in however long that miniseries has been going on. And you don't have any kind of bond with those characters to the extent that you know that any of them would gladly die for you. And have had others do the same just, the week before or a day before or whatnot. And because of that, when they die in the movie or wounded or whatever else, it's sad and you might cry, but it's that emotional
dimension.
Well, it's the emotional dimension, but it's also the blow that is truly the beating heart of the combat experience. And it's experiencing that again and again and again and again until I lived a lot of my Afghanistan deployment in a foxhole on the side of a mountain with, no electricity, a limited amount of bottled water when they didn't, the airdrop didn't drop it on the Taliban instead of us. And my daily existence was either being mortared or going on patrol and getting in, firefights with dudes that just ran off on mopeds or whatnot. And that was that. And in order to cope with that, I had to more or less both, accept that I was not likely to survive, even though realistically a high percentage of the platoon is going to, survive even if they're wounded. But also I had to convince myself that my existence was somehow normal, and that this is just the way the world is, this is the way life is, and it's those damn civilians that are living some warped sense of reality because they're not in this spot. And, we all talk about that, we all discuss it.
How dare they?
Yeah, it's this assumption that these stupid civilians don't know. It's not that they should be jealous of us, but they don't know what the real world is. This is the real world. It's killing people every day. It's having your friends die. It's living this existence all the time. And that is a huge force multiplier for when you're on the ground having to engage in that type of stuff on a daily basis. But then when you come home, because you didn't die like you were planning on, then it is, it's 3 sheets to the wind. And like Joe pointed out, I've lost count of how many platoon members and buddies of mine have committed suicide. I have multiple members of my platoon who are now in jail for different homicides for the rest of their lives. Just all these different problems. Or we used to talk about how you never actually get out of the infantry. You either die or you re-enlist. And those are the only two realistic options on the other side. And there was a while after I got out that I started wondering if that was actually accurate. People used to put in lots and bet on how long it was going to take for whoever was getting out to get back into the infantry or commit suicide or wind up in jail or whatever else. And as depressing as that is, we just kind of joked about it. It was just kind of a funny thing, and that was just the way that life was. Until the very small percentage of us actually got over the hump on the other side and started leading, I don't know how you want to judge it, but somewhat normal lives to the extent that we could function in society and be one of those worthless civilians, which is what we all needed to be, like on the other side of the spectrum, worthless civilians. Anyway.
So thinking about that point where you go back to becoming a worthless civilian. What the question I've got now is, how have popular narratives or influence, others' perceptions by, I say other, I mean just like American society, like their perceptions of you as a veteran, and how does that make reintegration, becoming a civilian again, difficult for new veterans? And I want to start with Michelle again, because she's an Air Force officer who did not fly a plane, but boy, I bet a whole lot of people asked that.
Yeah, and so I should preface all of this by saying that, I had it very light in the grand scheme. Right? I did not experience trauma transitioning out of my service because because I never was in a situation that would have created for me the kinds of post-war, post-traumatic experiences that have obviously shaped my co-panelists in some really profound ways. And I could have, right? I mean, things could have gone really badly in Somalia. In fact, they did, but I wasn't there at that time when the whole Black Hawk downturn happened. So I came out unscathed. And I also knew exactly what I wanted to do when I left the Air Force, which was to go get a PhD, and I did that immediately. But yes, so when I tell people that I'm a veteran and I tell them that I was in the Air Force, yes, they do ask us to fly planes, and very small percentage of people in the Air Force actually fly planes. All the other people in the Air Force do support for the people who fly planes. So then I say, I was an intelligence officer. Oh my gosh, you're a spy. Nope, not a spy. I watched CNN, and I paired quite often, with other kinds of intelligence that was processed and collected at some other level, and then I reported it to people. Essentially, I was kind of a journalist, right? I mean, I fused a whole bunch of materials together, and I reported it to decision makers. So that also is super unglamorous. And then, I mean, the kind of third thing that I think people think about me, because I was in the military, is that I'm somehow extremely tough, or they have some kind of G.I. Jane image of me going on, and that's not me either. Right? I mean, I went into the Air Force because my father was in the Air Force. He wanted me to go in the Air Force. It paid for college, and then I was more or less a clerk in the military, right? I mean, I pushed paper, I did briefings, I deployed sometimes, but, you know, I was never in this kind of situation that my co-panelists are talking about. So, you know, perhaps I had some wherewithal to get through the training and all of that stuff, but I definitely don't think of myself as somebody who's just out there kicking ass all the time.
Get your ass kicked.
Right. So then I guess the last thing I'll say is, you know, I really struggle when people, and I'm sure others will have other things to say about this, I really struggle with the thank you for your service thing. I struggle because I don't know what that means. Like, are you thanking me for having, I mean, what are you thanking me for? Are you thanking me for having deployed to a place that I made it out of unscathed? Are you thanking me for having taken advantage of the incentives that the SAM offers, like educational benefits, free health care, all of that stuff, more of us too. Are you thanking me for being a patriot? I don't know what it means. I don't know what the substance of it is, and I find it really troubling, actually, that most people who do that, who offer that gesture, especially on certain holidays, right, don't understand any more than I do about what they're actually doing. Right? It's like a teacher thing that you say when you hear it somebody who's a veteran. And maybe it's because they're uncomfortable with thinking about what it actually means to have been in the military. I don't know, but I find it profoundly troubling.
I want to jump in on this too, because I'm sure you experience something similar to me in the fact that when people see me, I'm cheerful and squishy and like, you know, like I don't look like a killer or anything like that. But then, because I'm also a veteran, I will get the thank you, and then I will get assumptions made that because you were a woman in the military and because you got out before women were allowed on the front line, you must not have ever seen anything horrible. And so they feel a little more comfortable in asking you completely inappropriate questions. And I've had to tell people before, you don't want to know the answer to that question, because if it did, it would keep you up at night. And so I think one of the things that is difficult is navigating this whole thank you for your service thing, and then just existing in a room as a female combat veteran, knowing that people are uncomfortable around you because they don't know how to talk to you, because they probably think they can ask you some really messed up questions, but in actuality, they don't want to know the answers to them.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's actually what I was thinking about saying. How many people in the room are veterans? I know there's a few. Has anybody ever asked you if you killed anybody before?
Yes. Yes.
People who are not a veteran. Have you ever thought about asking that question before? Like, be honest. It's okay.
Or what's the worst thing that ever happened to you?
Right.
Yeah.
One, don't ask that question. Two, like, that's one of the problems with the perception is like, you always assume that that person, that they're veteran, like, the people at the table have vastly different experiences. But you've assumed because of the things that you've consumed through media that, like, everybody is celiac killers and shit. It's ridiculous, one. But also, that kind of perception, and veterans, when you were asked that question, you kind of probably got upset. So, like, that's one of those things that, I mean, this is absolutely not the fault of civilians whatsoever, and it's not the fault of military who's being said about that question. It's the fact that, like, that drives people away. Like, well, he's asking it because he's not understanding. So you end up, like, cloistering yourself way too around other veterans. Like, a good example of that is, I've never met him before in my life until today. I flew across the country to come to, I could have been kidnapped. I'm like, hey, I trust him. Yeah, she drove me here. I got picked up from the airport by someone I met on Twitter. You know, like, you just kind of, you fall into what I consider a caste system. Like, you guys don't understand me. So I'm going to retreat into the people I think do understand me. And it creates its own caste and its own culture, which is incredibly toxic. And this, you see this in entertainment. Now there's movies and whole TV channels geared towards veterans specifically. You see this in apparel brands. And it's created a vet bro culture that's fucking disgusting. Excuse my language. Second, wait.
I think I gave you two. You've used them both in this answer.
But that kind of thing just it feeds the perception in the media, and that they retreated into themselves so they could be cloistered and carried away by everybody else. And then, like, if I was to see the perception of veterans, just veterans, in movies, you think of, like, we talked about, what was it movie called? Hurt Locker. Where he's walking through the convenience store and he's about to snap. Or there's another one, Stop Loss. Yeah, and he's in the Stop Loss, he digs a foxhole in his front yard. Yeah, there's all sorts of portrayals like that, that if I was a civilian but had no connection with veterans, I wouldn't want to hang out with one either, because they seem ready to snap at any given moment. Or how many times you go like, oh, I wouldn't mess with him, he's a veteran. What does that mean? He's just gonna snap and punch you in the face? Like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, untreated mental illness is not something that is the flag is staked by veterans. I promise.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of the above. I mean, I've even most alarmingly, I mean, obviously, countless times that how many people have been killed. More alarmingly than that, I've been asked how many Iraqi soldiers or Afghan soldiers I killed, which really underscores not only the ignorance of the military experience, but is kind of a twist of the knife, because it's also emphasizing that they have no idea what is going on in Iraq or Afghanistan. I've had people that literally didn't know that, and I remember I had a friend who, when I got out, or rather when we left Iraq, called me and said, aren't you stoked about that? Yeah, you know, it's good news. You know, we seem to have left it in a semi-stable condition, and you know, now we got one to go. And they were like, well, Afghanistan. And they go, well, those are two like different places. And, I mean, that, once again, underscores, this is a very intelligent individual. It's just you talk about the civil divide, when people don't have any kind of, I'm not talking about, universal service or whatnot. I mean, like, you can literally tune out and forget entirely that there are two wars, one of which is nearing 20 years long, still going on. You've got a major problem. And, what I tell people all the time is, I'm not a huge proponent of, reinstating the draft or whatnot. But I mean, for God's sakes, there's 0.3% of us who are participating in some capacity in what's going on. And the only responsibility that I think that civilians really, owe the country is just pay attention a little bit. Inform yourself as to what is going on the other side of the world. And then vote however your heart pushes you, and think about it, talk about it to people, but just don't completely tune out of it, because it's not, the odds aren't high that you or your daughter or son are going to be drafted tomorrow. You're still Americans, and it's in large part an American war. Both of them were, and so that, I think, is for me when the most pain comes. When I think about, again, all of my friends that I've lost for, a conflict that, I have mixed feelings about. I'm not quite as anti the war in Afghanistan as a lot of people, but I also, it hurts to think that, they were all lost for a country that not only isn't gonna, thank us all for our service, but more importantly, has no idea why they died, or, what any of that, what the goal is strategically.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think another thing that's kind of embedded for me in that thank you for your service moment is, what I should start asking is, well, when was the last time you talked to your legislator about what's happening in veteran services, for example, right? I mean, what do you know about what's happening to veterans in this country, right? And I think that connecting this kind of sentiment with politics, the hard politics of dealing with population of veterans who have had different kinds of experiences, but many of whom have been touched by extreme violence, which, as Eric has just noted, is often not even known widely in this country, right? Or is poorly understood. That's something that all of us can do, is pay more attention to what our country is doing for and with veterans in order to help them.
Our
Because
infrastructure is not ready for a 20-year generation of combat veterans. It's just not. It wasn't ready for a 4-year war generation of combat veterans, but we produced 20 years worth of combat vets, and the infrastructure was never designed to facilitate that.
But you mean like the VA infrastructure
Yeah,
and that
absolutely,
stuff?
but anything, like.
If you keep going, there'll be no non-veterans left. Let's make the whole country will be VA.
So I think my panelists really touched on something really important here, like the thank you for your service culture, which I think it's not meant to be an indictment of people who want to thank people who volunteered to serve the country, but I think I can speak for all of them when I say rehash a New York Times piece's argument from a couple years ago that it's almost an empty platitude that makes non-service members feel like, okay, I have expressed this gratitude, now I can carry on living my, American life, American society, and, perhaps, after that, put all thoughts of we're still in war out of my mind. And so to that end, my next question is kind of all right, how can the people in the room work on that? So, in American society, unless you have something right now.
No.
Okay. I have a script in my hands in case you can't tell me. In American society, we're all consumers of media, pop culture, popular narratives of war. And we kind of dug into those narratives a little bit. But a lot of this stuff is determined by people's tastes, by the public's tastes. And so to that end, how can American civilians and I guess, veterans, once they're civilians too, become more responsible consumers of popular narratives of war?
I mean, I think that the biggest thing is to think about so when I see a movie that has some element of the military represented or some aspect of war represented, I try to step back now and think like, what is the arc? What are we building towards? And honestly, I don't watch a lot of war movies that are made right now because I don't see the purpose in glorifying death and romanticizing violence and perpetuating some sort of blind patriotism to the idea of America, especially when the truth is so much more interesting. So I think, just developing some discriminatory tastes when it comes to, I don't want to see a movie about 6 dude bros who go into the middle of the desert and kill everybody. Like, that does not serve a purpose. But I do see the value in promoting popular culture that gets into the way more fascinating, if slightly more mundane, like intricacies of military service, because everyone has a blockbuster movie inside of them, right? Like, we've all done some crazy stuff, and maybe it didn't involve killing a bunch of people.
I agree when it comes to Hollywood movies. Like, all the war movies are being pumped out. They're normally with like Pentagon support. Like, there's a whole office dedicated to that. Why do you think they're supporting them? Like, it's not to actually show reality. Like, they changed Zero Dark 30, which is not a movie, but the CIA pretty much had like a co-producer credit on that, and they changed a scene to make it look like torture work. Like, there's a reason why they do things like that. But don't consume it. I think that's the best thing you can do. Consume documentaries. Restrepo is a great documentary. He made another one with Corwell. That's a great documentary because it humanizes things. You see that the people who are actually doing the job are not the people we thought we were enlisting with, but they're the actual people who have thoughts and feelings, and they're probably pretty bitter and jaded about the situation they found themselves in, and you see them change, and you see them come home most of the time. The Sebastian Junger book War goes more into their story when they go home. But the critical thinking, I know I had to when I wanted actual answers of why I was in Afghanistan for the second time, or why it's now been 20 years and like my friends are still going to Afghanistan. There's no movie that's going to cover that. There's very few books that are going to cover that. There's very few critical books written by veterans who've come out about the war.
Right.
Those stories are pretty.
Unless you're a Navy SEAL.
Yeah, unless you're a Navy SEAL.
I'm tired of
In which case, congratulations on your movie, sir. Yeah, those will be on the front shelf. They'll read about how this guy named the Reaper totally saved Fallujah. Yeah, you'll read about all that stuff. But those aren't critical voices in reality, especially when some of them are, documented frauds. But, there's a reason why these movies are coming out, why they're getting government funding and everything. It's to numb you, so you don't ask questions, so you don't learn the names of the people who have died and ask why they died.
Yeah, a key part of my, getting over that indoctrination of hate that they pushed with let the bodies hit the floor thing. When I came home, there was no reconstruction, there was no, cure for that, and so I had to do it on my own. I took, a 4,000 level Arabic women writers English course because I had been taught to hate an entire population of people, and I was like, maybe I just need to take a class on what women of that culture are dealing with and see if we can't find some common ground.
Jump in with an editorial comment really quick. Joe talks about the office and the DoD that works with Hollywood film producers. I actually wrote my master's thesis on that office in the 1950s. Let me know if you want to read it. You'll be the first. I had no idea about that, by the way.
quite as much of a, I mean, I get irritated. Irritated is not the right word. The thing for your service bit, I never really chimed in on that. I mean, it's the most awkward thing about that for me is that, I mean, what do you say to it? Like, you say like, thanks, or
Awkward
you're welcome,
nod, grimace.
or, I mean, it's just like, I didn't give you like a present or something. Like, it's just, you don't know what to respond with. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that it angers me because I recognize that civilians and us, whatever you want to define that, are all in the same boat. Like, we all, you know, most of us, I would argue most of the people in this room didn't vote for Dick Nixon in the interest of ending the draft to send things toward an all-volunteer force and have, you know, enough prescience to know that in 20 years you were going to be in a 20-year quagmire, right, 30 years. And, you know, because of that, I think that all of us are kind of stumbling around trying to figure out how do we work this situation socially in a healthful way. And generally, I think civilians who say that stuff mean well, universally,
Yeah.
100%. And, you know, the same awkwardness that we feel in how do you respond to it, more or less the same awkwardness that they feel in saying it. But my advice to people when confronted with that situation is that, I mean, as a combat vet, I mean, you know, I've unfortunately done my fair share of blowing stuff up and killing people and shooting stuff and, you know, all of that. But, I mean, combat for me is, and I think everybody, is a story of loss, almost universal. And, you know, if you didn't have the misfortune of losing friends, you at the very least lost a part of yourself in the process of, you know, taking lives and all that stuff. But I think that when you're approaching someone like that, the one thing that's going to stop you from making gaffes like how many people you killed or, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan, stupid places, is think about how you would approach someone at a funeral, or how you would want someone to approach you at a funeral after you have suffered some grievous loss. You know, you've lost a parent or you've lost a loved one of some kind. Because you wouldn't ask questions like that. You would be there and you'd be willing to listen if that person was interested in talking about it, but you wouldn't hamper them with, oh, well, you know, let's talk about, you know, how did they die again? What was that like when you learned? You know, like, I mean, no one would do that. And I think if you approach vets with that same mindset, it's enough of a close analogy to kind of temper the urge to either know more or just the kind of the blind patriotic urge to, I've got to somehow signal my allegiance to the country to this individual because X, Y, or Z. And that, you know, none of that's necessary. None of us expect that. And if we do, we don't deserve it. And it's something that we want to be as veterans, more than anything else, part of society. And we want broader society to, you know, respect the things that we've done, but also question many of the things that we've done respectfully. But also say, okay, well, we understand that there's a small percentage of the country that is engaged in these wars, and that's why it's important to us to, like I said earlier, remain informed about those conflicts. But at the same time, we come to our own conclusions, and we recognize that you want to be a part of the society still that you fought for, and we want to try to make it really easy for you to achieve that singular goal.
Yeah, and
I remember, yeah. So, I mean, I think the other component of this, sorry, I stepped up, is, so we've kind of, I think, been largely bashing popular media. And I just want to say that there are actually some great journalists and photojournalists out there doing important work to try to expose some of these more difficult stories. So, for example, Ann Jones has this great book published with Haymarket Press that examines kind of death in combat theaters. So she actually, goes into the surgeries, the operating rooms, and she talks about the kinds of injuries that soldiers sustain in combat, which are very particular when it comes to IEDs and that sort of thing. And she writes about it, and she writes about it in a beautiful way. She tells the truth, and she makes it available for people who want to know what it's like in a certain way to read. And there's also a photojournalist whose name I just came to me, Lindsay Adario, who did something very similar with she happened to be on hand, embedded with a unit when a troop was severely injured. She accompanied all of them back to the operating room, and when the soldier passed away from his injuries, she actually captured the moment when the doctors sort of pronounced him dead, and they sort of decided how they were going to treat his body and all of that. And then she ended up establishing a relationship with the family back home. She had all these photographs, and she interactively worked with the family to decide what would happen with those photographs. There's a great podcast about it, I think, on Radio Lab. You can hear about her. So I think it's important also to note that there are people out there trying to tell us these stories in sensitive and honest ways, and we should read them, and we should pay for them. We should pay journalists, and we should pay writers to do that work. Then, from a more pedagogical angle, one of the things I found very effective with students is simply, I'm a historian, I show them the primary sources that address combat experience over time and the ways that soldiers in the past have also dealt with similar kinds of questions and issues, and students are always, I think, compelled by those things. So we have to give them a chance to do that. And I think, and then the last thing I'll say, and I'll stop talking, is here again, I've forgotten the author who kind of developed this concept, but the concept of moral injury is a different way of thinking about what it's like to be somebody who's experienced combat and to come back into a society that does not know what that's like. Moral injury essentially suggests Shea, right? Jonathan Shea, I think is his last name, S-H-A-Y. You can see that I'm an Asian person. But so Jonathan Shea is, I think, he's a philosopher, and he kind of developed this concept of moral injury as a way of talking about what it's like to violate the kinds of customs and norms that societies establish around killing and around causing harm to people that we sanction in one context, right? Like we say, go over there and kill people because that's what we're there for. And then you come back here and you're not supposed to do that anymore. And the kind of moral problems that creates for people who've experienced combat, I think is a useful way to help people understand the profound complexity of being a veteran in this society. So, I went on but sorry.
And so I have one more question for the panelists before we move to a Q&A session. And it's, okay, so we touched on a kind of a latent theme in those answers was, listening to veterans telling their own stories is a very important step that people in American society can take to kind of push back on this militant divide. Documentaries in particular, perhaps. And the question I have is, so how can we empower veterans to reclaim their own story amidst these popular narratives of war?
Well, I think that, and this could be provocative, I've sensed in recent years, especially in combination with the ongoing frustration of the lack of strategic guidance in Afghanistan, this frustration of where things headed, and I think we tend as a veteran community to want to reach for what I think is the Vietnam narrative of, well, we were used by our government and more or less against our will, or at least our efforts were squandered maliciously, instead of it just being a product of just really poorly planned bureaucracy and strategic drift, all those things. But I'm beginning to sense from some corners of the veteran community almost an attempt, and this could just be projection, but an attempt to almost signal to the wider civilian community that, listen, I'm as pissed about all this as you are, and don't think of me as one of them. Think of me as someone who, is just as against this stuff as all of you. So won't you take me in? And I think that is a major sacrifice to the well-being of the country, because at the end of the day, we did volunteer to participate. And we might have been naive 18-year-olds. I mean, we were aware. And I think there's a part of all of us who rightfully should be proud of whatever small part each of us plays in the larger dynamic, regardless of how we feel about political dynamics or strategic dynamics of what's going on. And I don't think it's healthy to sacrifice that. I don't think it's healthy to convert your personal story into a story of how you were misled by donkeys and, boycott the stupid podcast. Want to turn it into I hate everything the Defense Department ever tried to stand for type of narrative, because for one, it's a little flat, and for two, I don't think it helps to bridge the divide. It just throws your weight to one side of the spectrum or the other, instead of serving as the kind of unique interlocutor that I think veterans are perfectly posed to become. We can speak to both sides instead of saying, well, the hell with the military, I'm a civilian now, and so now I'm going to stand over here and throw rocks to the military with all of you to signal that I am one of you. Instead, you can say, listen, I'm from the military, and I've got a lot of criticisms of the military too, but I'm also here to help you kind of nuance your image of the military to where you don't think that we're just a bunch of Imperial stormtroopers who are, zapping Luke Skywalker in the desert. We also have, we're people, and the other people who work in the Pentagon are also people. We're all people, just like you are. And we need to have a conversation about the mutual humanity that both sides of the divide have. And I think until we do that, there tends to be a drive for a lot of veterans to kind of try to pick sides and to burn all their Moto t-shirts, and or on the other side just become constantly embittered against civilians and refuse to cross that divide. It's usually one or the other, this dichotomy that is completely false and toxic dichotomy, in my opinion.
So I agree with that to an extent, because I fluctuate wildly between being, I am an anti-war person now, but it's less of a, they wasted my youth because I did volunteer. I volunteered for my deployments. I chose to go back to Afghanistan. It's more of an intense regret. And it's, but for people who want to tell their story, it's absolutely important that you do. And obviously this is a great time to do so. But what's more important than these glorious combat stories, which none of us probably actually have, is telling people what the military is really like. So don't have another generation of people who are making their wondering into a propaganda poster. They know, you're going to be surrounded by a whole bunch of misguided youths too. A whole bunch of teenagers. Another teenager is probably going to control your life. You need to tell the real story, the fine minutia of the really dumb stuff that you think nobody really cares about, but everybody's kind of intensely interested by. Because if they want to watch things blow up and they want to watch people shoot things, you can turn to any channel on TV. It's on every single channel. They don't know about real life. Even the 2 years I spent in Afghanistan, less than a cumulative 2 hours of that was fighting. There's a whole lot of other stories.
Yeah, so over the course of the last 2 years, I've collected 70 oral histories from student veterans at the University of Georgia. And I would say within just a percentage or two, 90% of the participants will sit down and then before I hit record, apologize. Because their story is not that interesting. It's not what I'm doing this for. It's not going to contribute to anything. And I have yet to finish a oral history and then be like, oh, you were right, that's garbage, I'm filling that is just not happening. And that's because it's fundamentally one person's experience over time, and we are all naturally narcissistic, selfish people. And if you start to hear your own story being vocalized by someone else, you're just naturally interested. And so I think one of the things that veterans can do to speak to a community, to divide or to cross that divide, civilians and veterans can work together to start telling their stories. Like participate in an oral history project. If there's not one, start one. But also, you know, one of the key characteristics of veterans is we don't talk about it, not to people that don't know. So it's very insular. Veterans talk about hard days to other veterans, but not to other people. But I think that writing offers a means of safety for you and valuable therapy to write down just a simple chronology. Like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then see your story on the page, and maybe even just sit with it because one of the other trends I've noticed is that people who got out of the military 2 years ago have very different views on their military service than people who got out during the post-Persian Gulf, or people who served during the Cold War, or the pre-9/11 enlistee versus the post-9/11 enlistee. So there are points in relatively recent American history that will change a veteran's perspective, their experience, their story, and it's all valuable. But I think you have to put it on a piece of paper for someone to benefit from. So, you know, not all memoirs are going to be bestsellers, but if you have the urge to, but if you feel the urge to make your story available for someone to learn from, then even if that's just your family, there's value to that.
All right, so at this point in time, I recognize we're like a little bit over the time. I told you it all was going to end, but hey, like you're all here of your own free will. If you need to leave, now's your chance to do it without being awkward. If you're one of my students and doing it, you get an F. Okay, but to that end, I do have some final remarks I want to give before we begin our Q&A. If you're a vet, you've wandered into this room, and you're not like actually registered for this writing workshop, well, you're in the right place. We've got food for you. We can help you. We can help you tell your own story. Come see me afterwards. We'll make that happen. To the participants who are already registered, lunch is going to be across the hallway, and it's going to start right after the Q&A session. I'd like to thank the volunteers who are kind of bringing the room and have sat in a couple places. They've made a lot of this possible by letting me sit here and talk while doing things that need to actually be done. Remember that Joe's book event is at 6 p.m. at Linda's Down Bar. And seriously, y'all, you can hear him talk about his books. And also, we will buy you food and drinks. You undergrads are hungry, I know you are. And then before people like run off to the winds, we need to make a statement that Amber Mathwig, the Student Veteran Assistance Coordinator here on campus, was arrested earlier this week because UNC police conducted an unannounced simulation round training exercise right next door to the Carolina Veterans Resource Center. To those of you who are uninitiated, and again I'm looking at my students, simulation rounds, when you fire them from your weapon, sound a whole lot like the real thing. And perhaps UNC police Honestly, it was reckless of them to conduct that training next door to the designated space on campus for veterans without letting anybody know. And Amber was arrested when she went over and asked them to stop, and when they refused, she tried to just sit down in their training for the safety of the people that it's her job to look out for on campus. She was arrested for doing her job, and her charges need to be dropped, frankly speaking. Okay. So, I'd like to open it up to a Q&A. If you need to run.
Hi, my name's Chris Nelson. I'm an anthropologist, and it occurred to me when we were talking about the dimensions of like public representations of the military experience, there's this kind of space in between. Since we've got a novelist on the committee, I think that's really awesome. You know, you could be the next Tolkien who turns their war experience into a really compelling novel. You know, I'm very excited about that possibility. But a lot of us are academics who are involved in creating texts that are aimed at a different level, you know? And one of the things, I guess, for my students, I end up reading a lot of essays every year that are submitted to journals. And over time, I've realized that the more I know about the essay, the less convincing it is. You know, I do field work in Japan, and I'm really excited about essays until I come to one about Japan, and then I realize, like, oh, wait a minute, you really do not get what's going on. And increasingly, I've been reading essays about veterans' experiences and things like that written by anthropologists, and I find them incredibly unconvincing. Like, people just seem to have put as many spaces between themselves and the experience of soldiers that they could possibly do. And, you know, it also, of course, you know, in every discipline they're influenced by whatever the popular theories are, things like that. But I think that it's a real challenge to think about how people can create texts that are going to be used in classrooms, that our students are going to read, that are going to talk about this war in some reasonable way, that are going to bring the experience of soldiers, you know, in some less mediated way to the eyes of students and readers. And I worry that maybe we've already missed that window. You know, anthropologists, for example, try to bring the lives of distant people to their readers and make them intelligible, make them make sense, you know? And I don't know where the people were who were supposed to be out there doing field work about the military during the wars, but instead, you know, primarily there are things about the consequence of PTSD and things like that, which I think are very valuable, but still make soldiers look like veterans, or look like victims, you know, that do not really graphically portray the experience, even to the extent of, you know, when an author tries to talk about a joke or something, they don't quite understand what's happening. And so I would just encourage everybody to think about that too, that if you're an aspiring young scholar, that these are the kinds of things that you might want to take into account, that we have to think about ways to make these experiences clear to people.
I can speak to that. I think you're absolutely right. I think that it's also an easy shift to make. So for my comprehensive exams, I built in my War and Society field, I built a 4,000 level history class on the American veteran from the Revolutionary War to the Bonus Army, and I ended with the attainment of the Montgomery GI Bill, because that's when the government recognized that America is a perpetual warfighting machine, and we're going to keep creating veterans, and we need a bureaucracy in place that will always take care of them, because from the Revolution up until that point, there was always grassroots efforts like reinventing the wheel after every single war. And so I think, but that's easily considered if you just point out where the veterans exist, right, at any given moment in time and what they're doing. I think the reason I'm so interested in veteran history is because it's American history. The first president of this country was a veteran of war. Like, and that kind of gets glossed over because he's the founding father too, but he was also a combat veteran. And he was elected the first president. And if you go back and look at not just the victimization of these poor, ragged, returning soldiers, but the political powerhouses that they represent and what they're able to do because of networking, what they're able to do because of possibilities opened up to them by their military service, right? You know, they were sending the veterans out west first because they had the weapons and they knew how to take care of, like, encounters with people. And you get this, the American history, the story of American history is a story of what people returning from war from its impetus have been able to achieve. But you also see where they diverge, right? So you see where maintaining a mantle of white supremacy becomes a goal of the American military the second they decide that to re-enslave the patriots who fought in the American Revolution. But then there's that other branch too, the Double V campaign, the Black Union soldiers in the Civil War. So there's two ways you can use your military training to affect policy, society, culture, once you return from warfare, and it's either you are working in these paramilitary extra-legal organizations, like the Klan or Knight Riders or something like that, using the skill set that the military trained you to perpetuate something, or you come home and you start actively dismantling it, and you start working towards what the words mean on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, regardless of what it was intended. They wrote the words down. So, you know, women, Black Americans, Native Americans have access to those words too, and you can use your military service. I don't know, I think I've gone off on a tangent, but just to say that, like, the American veteran experience is diverse, it is complicated, and it is super effective at changing American culture, politics, society. You just have to see it, like, and recognize what's happening.
If you have one.
Yeah, I'll just say one quick thing. I think one thing that veteran service can highlight really nicely for anybody is the relationship between the state and the individual as it pertains to citizenship. Because if you track what Black soldiers have done from the founding of this country to the present, or immigrants, the kind of gold standard of full citizenship is something that when you start to look at who is serving at what time and what they get or do not get out of their service, it tells you quite a bit about what's going on in this country at any given moment. And so I really appreciate what you just mapped out, and I think veterans who are aware of their citizenship status and how full it is, right? Like, is it 100% or is it something else? And then to be able to explain why that is the case is I think, a powerful way for veterans to be able to articulate their own place in politics and to be better citizens, honestly.
Well said. Due to time constraints on the afternoon's event, we only have time for one more question. Especially my students, if you were banking on answering a question, just send it to me via email and I can get it answered by our panelists.
It's not really a question, more like a statement. I was going to piggyback on what you said earlier about documentaries and how veterans portray that. Like, I was in UNC-Chapel Hill, so I get asked a lot, like, was that, you know, that time frame was pretty bad and all that, but also that's one valley in Afghanistan during 06, 07. So like you said, like, we just had to have camera guys with us. For some reason, I don't know why they came there, they did, but like, that experience is not just 100 guys in that valley. That's 1,000 guys over a time frame from Afghanistan. It was pretty rough from 06 to 2010, and you didn't hear much about it. So like, yeah, we're Strepo, this and that, whatever, but like, it's just 100 people's perspective of a 20-year war over a 15-month, you know? So like, yes, it was great to like get the word out there, because it did bring a lot of light onto Afghanistan, because nobody thought we were over there. But just to piggyback off him, like, I guarantee you his time frame, when I talked to him about where he was at in Afghanistan, I know what was going on there. It's just, we had camera guys, and I mean, it's not just, we get people that 173rd gets praised all the time for that. Yeah, it was a hell. It sucked, but I'm sure your deployment sucked, and it's just like, so.
Yeah, and to build one closing thought off of that, one of the challenges that we face that we don't perhaps have an answer to yet is like, how do we take these very vivid, visceral stories of 100 guys in a valley in one place and try to use that to make the entirety of the military experience intelligible to a nation of, what's our running population estimate right now?
329.
350? Yeah, we got a lot of people that we're trying to deliver understanding to, and so how can we effectively generalize from a, small scale stories like that? That's a big challenge, and
And like, that's what I kind of like hate. Like, I mean, if you think about Afghanistan, that's a big format of it. But that was, like I said, a 20-year war, 15 months. It's like, yeah, I'm proud to be part of it, but like, I also feel kind of guilty that it takes away from, there's been a few more documentaries since then that are getting out there, but like for a while that was one out. So everybody was like, oh, that's the only thing happening in Afghanistan. Like, no, that's just 1 mile valley, 1 by 5 mile. 15 months, like it's a 20-year war over the whole country. There's a lot more like going on, and I think more people need credit for it and stuff like that.
Yeah, and one of the guys who made the documentary, Sebastian Young,
Yeah.
one of my favorite journalists of all time, and I actually reached out to him while I was writing the book. And while he could, due to contractual obligations, he couldn't write a review or anything, but he said, even if it doesn't get picked up by anybody, you need to tell your story. More stories need to be told. It doesn't matter if you're a cook or an infantry dude sucking up a mountainside.
Exactly.
Everybody's story is important. That's one of the main reasons I actually finished it.
And going back to
Just super encouraging.
conflict
Maybe
journalism,
just stop.
Yeah.
they need more credit because we talk about PTSD. It's like I'm actually friends with Lindsay Dario. We collabed on her photo book. I don't know the one she just came out with, but she's been kidnapped and she's been stuff, and they suffer traumatics, and they're dying over there, and they're sacrificing their life to tell our story, to bring that gap that you're talking about. I just think they need more credit and more support.
The guy from Restrepo died.
Yeah, he died in Libya. He was one of the nicest dudes you ever meet. When he got killed in Libya, trying to tell the story. We're trying to bridge the gap between conflict and everything. So
I'll just tag on to that. I mean, the other advantage to that stuff is that when there is a film, or there's a book, or there's even an article, it prevents that awkward interchange between the unknowing civilian and you, because you can just point to that. And like I pointed out, Restrepo didn't exist when I got out,
Exactly.
and there was really no good documentary that you could easily point to. But now, if somebody's like, hey, how many of you stop them? And you're like, no, actually, you should go watch this, or you should go read this, and the more of that gets out, the more people who are willing to tell those stories on behalf of those of us who are interested in telling stories ourselves, the more you can bring down the need for those awkward questions, because I don't think it takes much more than watching Restrepo to grasp that that's probably not a question that you should ask someone that you care about or you met or whatever. But I also wanted to, I know we're short on time, but I just wanted to mention that, as a historian, people ask me all the time, they're like, how did your experience inform your study of, Civil War or Vietnam or whatever? It's conflicts that I take part in. And there's always a risk of reading too much of your own experience into the text. And as a historian, that's about as blasphemous as it can get. But at the same time, most of the questions that I ask of military history are, and I think Kate can probably speak the same thing, are coming from realizations that I had in the military, or during the transition into a civilian. So I don't look at Civil War soldiers with the assumption that I'm going to find the exact same experiences, the exact same ideas that I had. But the questions that I ask of their experience, both during the war and afterward, are directly transposed from my experiences, and then ask the question, I wonder what it was like for them. I wonder what this situation was like for them. And were the same dynamics in play, or were they not? And if they aren't, then why weren't they in play? And those things, for me as a historian, have been really fruitful, because I've been able to kind of galvanize my body of a lot of traumatic experience, and then turn that into something that has allowed me to not only come to insightful conclusions for myself, but also hopefully bridge the gap between not only civilians in the military today, but Americans and military's past simultaneously, so that that whole story can be a little more comprehensive and remove a little more of the fog.
Well, If everybody could join me in thanking them, because I had no idea how this was going to turn out. If y'all will excuse us, we've got to get some food on us and then get to work telling these stories.